You heard about yesterday's conversation, right? My eldest son and his wife are coming back home for childbirth. So put your stuff out in the yard. Excuse me? You won't have children anyway. You're not helping with my son's work. So, you should at least clear out the room. I thought, I'm paying $5,500 in rent. It's all getting too bothersome to think about. I live with my mother-in-law, and because my brother-in-law and his wife are returning, my mother-in-law tells me to leave the house. My mother-in-law, my brother-in-law and his wife, and my husband. This house is full of problems. I've been managing to get along smoothly so far. But it's becoming bothersome to think about everything. I've decided to stop thinking about it. Understood. I'll leave. I can't just put my belongings out in the yard, so I'll come back for them later. You're leaving? Thank you. That helps. Ignoring my happy mother-in-law, I packed my things and left the house. 7 seconds after exiting the door, I took out my smartphone and contacted a waste collection service. My actions, now free from overthinking, cannot be stopped by anyone. I am Allison, a 40-year-old IT consultant. My husband, Dylan, also 40, is a self-employed entrepreneur who runs 3 restaurants. We are both 40, and people often assume that, given our age, we have had a long marriage and children. However, we are actually newlyweds. Both of us have been career-focused all our lives, which is why we didn't marry until this age. I had given up on marriage as I approached 40. But that changed after I casually stopped by my future husband's bar one night after work. Is this your first time here? Yes, it is. I've been curious about this place for a while because it looks stylish. But it's hard to enter alone. However, after working hard today, I treated myself and finally decided to come in. I was relieved to see there was a counter where I could sit comfortably by myself. We have many women who come here alone, so feel free to come by any time. Sitting at the end of the counter, my husband engaged me with a smile. I knew he was just trying to capture a new customer. However, being almost 40 and lacking acquaintances to casually dine with, even knowing it was just customer service, I was pleased by his approach. As I started to feel comfortable in my husband's restaurant, I began visiting frequently. As a regular, it became normal for me to sit at the end of the counter, and for my husband to talk to me while I ate. What exactly does an IT consultant do? We introduce IT to companies, plan strategies, and I've even worked with restaurants. For example, I proposed a system where orders can be placed from tablets to reduce labor costs and improve efficiency. Oh, I've seen those recently. How much does that cost? Well, for a place this size, about this much. No way, that's impossible. I definitely can't afford that in a small private business. When I punched the numbers into my smartphone's calculator and showed him the screen, he vigorously shook his head and hands. Dylan, curious and eager, always jumps at new information during our conversations, looking to apply it in his own work. While our conversation seemed casual, my husband was genuinely dedicated to his work, and I gradually became attracted to him. Likewise, he appreciated that I was a hardworking person. I'm always busy with work and can't chat for long. So why don't we go out to eat together sometime? Eagerly agreeing to an invitation to dine with a restaurant owner, I was thrilled. I was excited to be invited by my husband, but at nearly 40, it felt embarrassing to admit such girlish emotions, so I kept it to myself. Not just once, my husband continued to invite me out for meals occasionally. As adults, frequent dining naturally leads to romance. After dating for 2 years, we married when we both turned 40. Embarrassed to be a bride at 40. I asked my husband to skip a wedding ceremony and only have a photo wedding. After the marriage, I moved from my single apartment to my husband's house. His house is a 3-story residence with a garden and parking, located in a high-end area. The rent is apparently $5,500. He lived there with his mother, Kelly. Some might think it's unbelievable to live with a mother-in-law right after getting married. But at 40, I don't mind much. Moreover, Kelly is 70, and my father-in-law has already passed away. So living together seemed necessary. Therefore, when my husband suggested living with his mother, I immediately agreed. However, once we started living together, I regretted accepting his proposal so quickly. Once I moved into my husband's house, in addition to our bedroom, I was even given a room for my work. The house was too large for just the two of them, there were plenty of spare rooms. As I settled into the new home, I asked my husband a naive question. Why do you need such a big house just for the two of you? Did I tell you I have an older brother? After graduating from college, he left home and we've barely heard from him. He doesn't come home, and we don't hear from him for years. He seems to move around a lot. Maybe he'll run into trouble and come back to live with Mom and me. That's why I rented a slightly bigger house. It might be a bit too big, but well, it worked out since you came along after we got married, right? As my husband unpacked books from my boxes and arranged them on the shelf, he laughed and shared the story of his brother, Sam. According to him, Sam wasn't doing well in his jobs and moved around a lot. But my husband didn't seem to think badly of him. Don't talk about that boy. What will we do if he really comes back? Standing at the entrance to what would be my workroom, it seemed Kelly disliked her eldest son, unlike my husband. From the perspective of a mother, it is not difficult to understand why Kelly shows a cold response to Sam, her eldest son, for neglecting his responsibilities. However, I worry that Dylan, who does not think poorly of his brother, might eventually clash with me over Sam. Besides, I don't like you either. Come on, Mom. We're going to live together, so please stop saying things like that. I'm not telling you to leave. But these things need to be said up front, don't they? Kelly walked away, her slippers clattering. Sorry about that. I'll make sure to talk to her. It's okay. She said something similar when we got married. I'll build my relationship with your mother as we live together. I took a book from Dylan's stationery hand and placed it on the shelf. Kelly seems to dislike my age. I'm 40, so it's not impossible for me to have children, but I admit it might be difficult. Moreover, Sam, the eldest son, isn't married and doesn't have children. Therefore, it's likely that Kelly won't see her grandchildren if things stay this way. She's disappointed because she thinks Dylan should have married someone younger. To Kelly, Sam, who doesn't fulfill his role as the eldest son, and I, who can't fulfill my role as a wife, must seem similar. While I understand her feelings, my body won't become younger. So there's nothing I can do about that. Once the move was complete and our married life truly began, Kelly openly gave me the cold shoulder. She ignored me when I spoke and tried to interact with me as little as possible. It's a bit lonely, but since I haven't faced any harassment or violence, I suppose it could be worse. Our relationship with Kelly will take time to build. For now, Dylan is a more pressing concern, and I am worried. Is work going okay for you? No, it's pretty bad. I need to act quickly. It's also difficult to arrange the finances. After dinner, Dylan sat at the dining table, his head in his hands. I stopped washing the dishes and sat down across from him to listen. Given the times, prices are soaring, expenses are climbing, and customers are tightening their belts. There's no end in sight to this situation. If it continues like this, I might have to close another store. A year into our marriage, the situation at Dylan's restaurants worsened. One of the 3 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might soon follow. Seeing Dylan's pained expression made me feel distressed too. However, it seemed Kelly was not affected by any of this. It's your fault for not helping out at the store. You focus only on your work instead of supporting your own husband. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife? It seemed our conversation was overheard by Kelly, who was in the next room. Sitting on the sofa, she shouted her thoughts at me. I wondered what she was thinking in such a tough time for Dylan. But she had her own way of seeing things. Dylan has been running his own business for nearly 10 years. Overcoming various hardships. I believe he'll manage this time too. You shouldn't look so worried, you're only making him more anxious. Are you trying to make him fail? That's terrible of you. Kelly yelled from the living room to the dining room again. Her words were laced with barbs aimed at me. I knew she wasn't just trying to motivate me. However, what she said wasn't wrong. I transformed her words into something positive, smiled reassuringly at my anxious husband, and resolved to support him through thick and thin. A year later, as Kelly had predicted, Dylan managed to stabilize the situation with his stores. And the closure of the second store was avoided. See, I told you so. A foolish wife who couldn't even trust her husband. Don't drag him down. As a side effect, Kelly, who had been ignoring me, now freely hurled insults. While it seemed our relationship had deteriorated, Dylan's business was doing well, so I tried to see it as a balanced situation. However, it seemed this incident had clearly resulted in a net negative for me. With the store's finances stabilizing and money becoming somewhat more plentiful, Dylan apparently started getting carried away, and I began hearing rumors of his infidelity. What is he thinking? If he has money, there are surely better ways to use it. And, strangely, when things start to go wrong, they seem to pile on. Having seen Dylan's business revenues drop before, I knew this pattern well. Yet, I never thought it would apply to my personal life too. Dylan. There was a call from Sam. From my brother? Yes. Apparently, the woman Sam is dating is pregnant. That's great news. She's a 32-year-old who worked with him at the same bar. And, well, he has something he wants to discuss with you. What? Why so formal all of a sudden? Sam is a part-timer, and his girlfriend, who's pregnant and planning to marry him, is also a part-timer. So, with a baby on the way, it seems they are going to have a tough time. They asked if they could come live in this house. Also, they were wondering if you could give them jobs at your store. Dylan was watching TV alone on the living room sofa. And I watched him from the dining room, wondering how to confront him about the affair. Then Kelly entered the living room and began speaking to Dylan. Their conversation was about Sam, whom I had never met, leaving me completely out of the loop as they quickly engaged in deep discussion. It's a strangely dissonant scene, indeed. Despite her previous disdain, Kelly was now pleading with Dylan to welcome Sam. The reason was simple: a grandchild. She had resigned herself to never seeing her grandchild's face. But now that it was a possibility, she had completely changed her tune. Not only that, but she intended to welcome him with great conditions, allowing him to live in our house and even work at Dylan's restaurant. Although Dylan had no ill feelings towards his brother, and renting this large house had been for such a time, the situation had changed. And now I was here. Isn't it strange for Sam and his wife to move into this house? I looked at my husband from the dining room to the living room. He was looking back at me. His expression was clearly one of distress. Come on, it's good. Sam is in trouble, and Dylan has the power to help him.
Yeah.
I get it. I sighed at my husband's lack of resolve. I had hoped he would firmly say no to his mother, but it seems my hopes were in vain. Dylan seemed concerned about my reaction, glancing over at me repeatedly. The relationship with his mother worsening, his affair. Living with his brother and his wife, problems were piling up. I didn't know where to start, feeling like my head was about to explode. I decided to stop thinking and just go to sleep for today. The next day, which was a holiday, I slept in until just before noon. Perhaps due to mental exhaustion. Since Dylan was at work, it was just Kelly and me at home. Dreading what I might be scolded for sleeping in, I reluctantly headed to the living room. You slept quite late. Must be nice. Bracing myself for her to nag about not fulfilling my duties as a daughter-in-law, I tensed up. But the words that came out of her mouth easily surpassed my imagination. You heard about yesterday's conversation, right? My eldest son and his wife are coming back home for childbirth, so put your stuff out in the yard. Excuse me? I still groggy, not fully grasping her meaning. Was she telling me to live in the yard, or to leave the house? You won't have children anyway. You're not helping with my son's work. So, you should at least clear out the room for Sam and his family. There are 2 spare rooms now, so if you leave and we can use your office. That will give Sam and his family a bedroom, a children's room, and a storage room. Don't you think the number and use of rooms are just right? It seemed she was indeed telling me to leave. And a storage room for my brother-in-law's family? I was being kicked out just so they could use a room for storage that didn't seem necessary. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms. And it wouldn't matter if it was gone. Just our bedroom would be enough for me. So the brother-in-law's family could live in this house without me having to leave. Perhaps seeing that his grandchildren could visit has truly made Kelly think there is no reason for me, a daughter-in-law, to stay in this house. I thought, I'm paying $5,500 in rent. It's all getting too bothersome to think about. I cleared my mind for a moment to give my brain a rest. Since Kelly and I were both silent, the ticking of the clock on the living room wall echoed loudly. I thought, all right, I'm leaving. After resting my brain, I decided to leave the house without worrying about what would happen to my husband, Kelly, or Sam's family in the future. Understood. I'll leave. I can't just put my belongings out in the yard. So I'll come back for them later. You're leaving? Thank you. That helps. Ignoring my delighted mother-in-law, I packed my belongings and left the house. 7 seconds after exiting the door, I took out my smartphone and contacted a waste collection service. My decision to stop thinking was unstoppable. Everyone might regret this decision later. After leaving the house, I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. I had contacted the waste collection service, but it seemed some preparation was needed. Since I wanted some time to think, this turned out to be convenient. 2 weeks after leaving the house, I rented an apartment and started living alone. To this day, Dylan has not contacted me. He probably thinks I will come back eventually. Thinking that Dylan is taking the current situation lightly makes me angry. Today, however, is the day after Dylan's restaurant's regular closing day. He should call me when he goes to prepare for lunch at the restaurant. What's going on here? The restaurant is completely empty. Just as I expected, Dylan called. I can explain over the phone. But it would be more efficient if your mother was there too. I'm heading to the house now, so can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right? I was unable to suppress a laugh before hanging up. Dylan must have been quite shocked. I laughed as I started getting ready to leave. What on earth is this? The refrigerator, cooking equipment, tables, and other important items from Dylan's restaurant are all gone. You did this, didn't you? You think you can do such a thing for free? Kelly shouted as I arrived at the house. It seemed Dylan had explained only part of the situation. A couple I didn't recognize was in the living room. It looked like Sam and his wife. They both seemed anxious, not fully understanding the situation. Especially with Kelly's extreme anger. Why did you do this? Now the store can't operate. It's my shop, so there shouldn't be any problem if I start closing it down. Or if I ask the waste collection service to dispose of the items I bought. What? Your shop. What are you talking about? You haven't explained it to your mother yet, have you? Explain it properly yourself. You remember that my store had the main branch and a second branch. And that the second branch was facing a management crisis, right? Yes, of course. Dylan, you changed the tables and chairs, signs, and the ambience of the store, introduced new cooking equipment to expand the menu, and even replaced the refrigerator and freezer with larger ones to accommodate the increased menu. You really worked hard to turn things around, didn't you? About that. Allison was the one who paid for those expenses. Huh? What do you mean? Hearing Dylan's words, my mother-in-law made a troubled face. She seems to be trying hard to understand, but probably still lacks enough information to grasp everything. Dylan seemed to struggle to continue speaking, fidgeting as if he was holding back in the restroom. Since the conversation wasn't progressing, I decided to take over the explanation. I was single until just before I turned 40, and I was working as an IT consultant. Plus, we didn't have a wedding and didn't buy a new house when we got married. So, I had quite a bit of money saved up. That's why I lent Dylan $100,000 to help turn around his struggling second store. $100,000. But, even for a married couple, that's not an amount you can just hand over lightly, right? So, I bought the rights to the second store and became the owner. Even though I say I'm the owner, I pretty much let Dylan handle everything. Nothing really changed on the ground, he runs the shop. The only change was that Dylan left the main store to someone else and moved to focus on reviving the second store. When my husband's store was in dire straits, I was there with him, showing a worried face. That's when Kelly yelled at me for not trusting my husband, which made me decide to support him through and through. That decision took the form of giving him the money I had saved while I was single. Dylan, is that true? Yes, it's true. She said it was okay to fail and waste the $100,000. But she gave me the money. However, since it was such a large amount, I suggested that if it's going to fail anyway, she might as well become the owner. We plan to pay back the borrowed $100,000 from the store's revenues bit by bit. But then it seemed simpler for the money to go directly to Allison as the owner if she took over. That way, the flow of money is straightforward. And Allison can decide if the store needs to close or not. That can't be true. Can something like that really happen? It's hard to believe when it's sprung on you suddenly, isn't it? That's why I brought some evidence to show you. I spread documents like the business license, transfer of fixtures agreement, and lease agreement on the table, all proving that I am the owner of the store. Kelly's face turned red as she verified my name on these documents. Why did you keep this a secret? You always said that you trusted him and that the store was turning around just as I said, right? You've been telling Dylan that ever since I married into this family. Dylan felt pressured by those words but tried to meet your expectations to avoid disappointing you. You tend to take a very cold attitude towards people who don't fulfill their roles. Like me or your other son, right? That's why Dylan couldn't tell you about the large sum he borrowed from me. You should have just said something. That's why Dylan can't speak up. People like Kelly don't realize they're putting pressure on others. They might think it's simple to just speak up, but for the person under pressure, it's much more burdensome than they can imagine. And while saying they should speak up, if they actually did, you would just end up disappointed and start complaining. It's crucial not to break Dylan's spirit with heckling from Kelly now that the store is on the mend. That's why I also kept quiet without saying anything. But when it came to the brother-in-law's family coming back, I really wished he had said no. Probably, Kelly told Dylan that he had the power to help his brother's family. And he thought it was related to work in his head. Mom, Allison, I'm sorry. This whole thing is because of my half-hearted attitude. If I had been more decisive from the start, we wouldn't have needed to rely on Allison's money. And if I weren't so mentally weak, I could have told you the truth. If Allison wants to close the shop, then there's no helping it. But what about the part-time workers? Don't worry, I've already informed everyone that the shop is closing in the next 2 weeks. And they've all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time jobs in other restaurants through my IT consulting connections. That's good. That was my only concern. So everyone was in on making me see an empty shop as a surprise. And kept the closure secret from me? Dylan. I'm sorry. I've been pushing you too hard. And Allison, I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave anymore. Dylan and Kelly began to apologize, making it seem as if everything was being smoothly resolved. But I am far from convinced, and there's still more to discuss. Let's settle this matter next. What? A divorce paper? I placed the divorce papers on the table, and Dylan picked them up with wide eyes. What does this mean? Why a divorce? This was supposed to be reconciliatory, wasn't it? Don't assume reconciliation has been achieved on your own. You might think it hasn't been discovered, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it. That's just a rumor, isn't it? Don't say such things without evidence. I displayed the images sent by a part-time worker on my smartphone, placing it among the scattered documents on the table. This, a photo of entering a hotel. A part-timer took and sent it. If 2 people leave the shop together and walk towards the nearby hotel district, anyone, not just police or detectives, can easily take such evidence photos. Maybe you got overconfident after getting the second shop back on track? But you've definitely gotten too carried away. I became the owner of the shop, but I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations. However, I can't just never show my face there, so I occasionally visited the shop. That's when the part-time workers told me that Dylan was having an affair and it was disturbing. And they wanted me to do something about it. When I promised to handle it, they were very cooperative. That's how Dylan's affair became widely known. They sent me evidence photos. And they kept the shop's closure a secret from him. Wait. You're closing the second shop and divorcing me? If that happens, what about the rent for this place? The rent here? What do you mean? I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the full rent of $5,500 for this place. Is that true too? It's true. When the store's revenue started to drop, I asked Allison to pay half. But then it kept dropping, and little by little, the amount Allison had to pay increased. Eventually, I ended up paying it all. $5,500 a month is the same amount as my salary. So, I've been paying the rent in full, and Dylan has been paying for groceries and utilities. So if Dylan divorces and the shop goes back to just one main store, obviously, you can't afford to live here anymore. Listening to our conversation, both my husband and my mother-in-law seemed to deflate like boxers who had just fought their hardest bout. Finally grasping the situation, my brother-in-law and his wife tentatively joined the conversation. What? What does that mean? We come back and there's no place for us to live? Wait, Sam. That's different from what you told me. Didn't you say everything would work out once we got back home? I'm sorry, brother. I don't have a store or a home to help you with right now. Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job. We have enough staff already. Actually, I need to cut back on payroll. Dylan will work it out, just give him some more time. Stop saying that. Hey. What about my home and job? Dylan, Kelly, and Sam began to argue about their future livelihoods. Sam's wife, whom I hadn't even known before, looked uncomfortably on. With the shop's closure and the divorce communicated, my part was finished. I was tired of constantly navigating and smoothing things over between my husband, his mother, and now his brother's family. I refused to live with my brother-in-law's family. What happens to this house next is not my concern, they can discuss and sort it out themselves. Amidst the shouting, I quietly exited the house. Later, because I had evidence of the affair, I was able to divorce smoothly. I could have demanded compensation for the affair. But I didn't need the money, given my job. And I preferred to minimize any further contact with my ex-husband and his family. After the divorce, my ex-husband, unable to afford the rent, had to move out of the house with his family. At that point, financially and emotionally drained, my ex-husband tried to push the responsibility of caring for his mother onto his brother, arguing it was the eldest son's duty. Of course, my broke ex-brother-in-law couldn't possibly take care of her. This led to a nasty fight between the brothers about who should take care of their mother. Ultimately, unable to solve the financial issues, my ex-husband had to take her in. But this fight ruined the brothers' relationship. Consequently, my ex-brother-in-law and his family went off somewhere, becoming incommunicado again. Watching their siblings push each other around worsened the family relations further. My ex-husband and his mother ended up living together begrudgingly in a smaller apartment. Unlike the spacious house they used to live in, they constantly see each other now, but barely speak, maintaining an awkward silence at home. My proactive steps resulted in the disintegration of one family dynamic. After the divorce, I proceeded with the shop's closure. It was a bit of a hassle as the owner, but necessary. Luckily, since the appliances like refrigerators, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs were fairly new, I managed to sell them at a good price, which helped cover the cleanup costs. Though my time as a restaurant owner was brief, and the experience of closing the shop was new, it will undoubtedly be beneficial for my IT consulting work in the future. It seems that work is a better fit for me than marriage. With this confidence, I continue to dedicate myself to my job every day.